We will begin with the opening prayers.
Vindrajere gyobani sene tönsan lishe domdre soande dedan denge düma tamje bayon senge shile josen tome meba kombe pijon tebe pare sendre soande sende chanjuro yembe bebe se samembra ni neradote chelo seba cheve namdaraji kume jemba dender soande chambe loji ninji donjo tanjawa meba engi jonambrata tome gyoda jela da gyoshi medange bra sindre soande Nyamongye lo geji me don shi ka de shaya nyimbu chulenchi kewe nganzu sambo me don we shi nyimpenze gandre soan so zora dena nyamja ne jangye so zora jebe shiragi Jero jezo jobra me jeba ngede tambra jede soa Chembro chala zeshi jeje lo me no daba nan ye sanjrane Gela jove lo drege de nyozong ora zede soa Tedra yende jelege gando Chashi jebe lusen dende bagama baye gomba zonje sho Ho sangye jedan soye sho nama lo chancho bando dane yesus Tage junye gibe sanama ye rola benzi Sangye rubra jo sangye jedan soye shonaman chanjo bado dane gyazut Dagi jenye gibe sanan ye rola ben Sangye rubra jo sangye jedan soye shonaman chanjo bado dane gyazut Dagi jenye gibe sanama ge rola ben Sangye robra jo chanze wanan cheje chaba Jeso yera guje sewa Gewa jose dagi jesa ba tamje dang chanjo jemo Sashi bücü çocuğu medo Rejave neşe ninde gemban Sange jindo emedi büvay Rogen anda jinla cebra jo Simce namge samba Loye cera cida Shizhon de monde bayi chege golo golo so Teni dewe cheki chame ge nyamo dewa dedande she laye ge da lo de ne ge romo na me ge nam da ro gu ni ra ge zang ba tam je ge do da ge she de do chen bi zi jin se ge ren de go ge ri she do shang la jin be so yi ji ya zo ding de me be do du zhen zhe ya la ma na cha ge de人工上被民主党被说人民能有录入什么种的政府性质，我等着把用这那么有不的这样了，谢谢刚才。谢谢好了，开始评我今天这边弄对这两了不，因为他们可能是这把个有人不成了想着，把这东西讲话是工作那么干嘛吧，因为跟你说的是基本上一动的嘛，吃了东西吃不完就去每天讲了，那就是就随便那种上面东西讲了，这些说的他们就是他们也说工作的人用。第四节了，那么一个高人民有的是小老少玩的，把那在那么这么些大个就。外面的就了，个人性别关系上的不上多点，我都不知道。我老说他定的，杨家的那么那个说的念多。
Once again, I feel it is extremely unfortunate for us to join together and have this opportunity to teach and listen to the Dharma. Likewise, I would also like to once again offer you my greetings, and at the same time, I would like to begin by continuing to speak what we began yesterday, and speaking about how Mikyo Dorje followed Karma Chinepa as his guru. So first of all, I think it'd be best to do this first. I think if I could, it'd be best to show you this first. So this is what it is. If you can go from my left side, I'm not sure which side it is from you, but maybe it's from your right. I don't know. But in any case, the first is Sangye Nyempa. He's on the left, and then second Dulmo Tashi Uezer, Chudip Sengye, and Karma Chinepa. See, these are the four main teachers of. These four main teachers of Mikyo Dorje are these four. So this gives their birth year, the year they passed away, and their lifespan. And so I've written this out approximately here. And among them, Dulmo Tashi Uezer probably passed away in 1545, and so I've written that there. And I was unable to get a good, clear picture of Karma Chinepa, but this picture is from a commentary on. This is from Karma Chinepa's own commentary on the Profound Inner Principles, and so I've taken that image from that edition and placed it here. However, still, what we still need to research here is what year Sanjay Nempa was born. Now, this is probably should be something that's easy to figure out. The year he passed away was probably in 1525, and so this is something we need to research. Now, Dulmo Tashi Uezer. We also need to research the year of his birth. And the others, I think we maybe have a mistake with Chudip Sengye. He lived into his 80s, and so there's probably a bit mistaken there. The lifespan is mistaken there. So that is what it is. And so I thought I'd begin by showing this to all of you. Now, Karma Pachinapa was the way Mikyo Dorje followed him as his guru is that Karma Pachinapa what happened?
The
way Mikyo Dorje followed Karma Pachinapa as his guru is that Mikyo Dorje sent 2 or 3 letters inviting Karma Pachinapa to come to him, and then later he also sent a much more forceful letter saying he absolutely must come. And still, and at the same time, he asked for Karma Pachinpa's opinions about who would be the best Kempo to receive the to give Mikyo Dorje full ordination. And at that point, Karma Pachinpa responded by said that the Joden Kenshin Chudip Senge, who was said to be an emanation of the Arhat Angaja, would be the best. And he explained the reasons. And so Mikyo Dorje said that Chudip Senge had to be the Kempo, and Karma Pachinpa should be the ritual master, ritual acharya, and they should both come to the encampment. When that letter came, they also sent people to escort them. And so Karma Pachinpa made his way towards Kompo. He met up with Chudip Senge on the way, and then from that point on, they traveled to the encampment together in Kompo. And then in the fire pig year 1527, on the 4th day of the 11th month, they came to a retreat center at Namtu Mountain in Kompo. And in that retreat center, there was a place called the Upper Retreat of Sampel Wangpo. And that is where they first met Mikyo Dorje. Now, for several days, Kenshin Rinpoche was quite elderly, so they rested for a few days. And during this time, Mikyo Dorje gave Karma Pachinpa the transmission of the 6 yogas of Naropa. Then they decided that on the 22nd day of that month, the astrological conjunctions were good. So Karma Pachinpa planned to start teaching Mikyo Dorje on that day. So that was the plan. But Mikyo Dorje said he couldn't wait until the 22nd. They had to start soon. I can't wait till the 22nd. I can't wait till the 22nd, he said. We have to do it soon. When he said this, they began on the 17th. And Karma Pachinpa began teaching Mikyo Dorje. On that day, on the 17th, in the morning, Karma Pachinpa began to teach Mikyo Dorje the Prajnaparamita texts. And then in the afternoon, in a gathering of the public, he was given an audience, and Karma Dorje made 100-fold offerings. And so at that time, Mikyo Dorje wore the black crown, and he gave teachings and made dedications and aspirations. Then from that time on, Karma Pachinpa would give as many teachings as could every morning, as it is said. And then on the 22nd, when Mikyo Dorje took the full ordination, Kempo Chudip Senge was the Kempo, Karma Trungpa was the ritual master, and there was a Gampo Kenshin Shakya Sengpo who was the private questioner. And Sampo Chuje Shakya Sampo had the same name, it seems. He was the timekeeper. And the Chuje of Gendun Gang Deshong and an appropriate number of the bhikshus from the four monasteries were present as Mikhe Dorje took the full ordination. So the next day after he'd taken the full ordination, they continued the teachings on this. And during the teachings, in the mornings, Karma Trungpa offered Mikhe Dorje the teachings on Prajnaparamita, and in the afternoon, the treasury of Abhidharma. And then after he's teaching those texts, he gave teachings on the the differentiating middle from expenses, the differentiating the dharmas and dharmata, the compendium of validity by Dignaga, the commentary on validity, the treasury of valid logic, the Pratimoksha Sutra, the Vinaya Sutra, the compendium of Abhidharma, entering the middle way, and other texts. And so Mikhe Dorje memorized this, and he also took many notes on this. And there's also a text on the precepts of the Vinaya by Nyakpua. And so Karma Trungpa taught from that and explained the precepts of the Vinaya very clearly. And he also took the text on the rituals of motions, the karma, the sangha, the ways the sangha conducts its business, and the practice of the three foundational rituals. And Mikhe Dorje told Karma Trungpa that he needed to, excuse me, and so then when we practice the three foundation rituals, from that time we've used the rituals on the three foundational rituals composed by Karma Trungpa. Also, when people wish to take the lay vows, or wish to take the refuge vows of the lay practitioner, or the complete lay vows, or the 8 fasting vows, all of these we primarily give them from the text written by Karma Trungpa. Then Mikhe Dorje told Karma Trungpa that he needed to give him explanations of all 3 types of the vows. And so Karma Trungpa said that Mikhe Dorje needed to receive all 3 types of the vows. And so from the Sangha Pandita's great bodhicitta, he gave Mikhe Dorje the vows of aspirational and Geta bodhicitta. He gave him the complete full empowerments and Tatra vows of the 9 deities of Vajra according to the 6th Karmapa Tongwon and spiritual texts, and taught him the ritual practice of the diagrams of the mandala mudras and melodies. And so in this way, he gave the 3 him the 3 types of vows. And also in the main teachings on the tantras come from in the Amar-Kagyu as well as other Kagyu lineages are primarily come from the Sublime Continuum. Since that is like a bridge in between the sutra and the tantra, we need to teach that. And we also emphasize the Hevajra Tantra in 2 books and the Profounded Principles. And so that time, Karma Trungpa gave him a detailed explanation of the Tantra in 2 books. And then in the actual practice, since he also gave explanations to the deities who we usually practice. He taught him about how to draw the diagrams for the diagrams for mandalas, and also gave at least examples of the mudras and the melodies and so forth. He also gave him the instructions on the Kala Chakra, gave him the astrology from Kala Chakra, as well as the 5 types of Sandhi, and all the profound Dharma past and from the 7th Karmapa Jasa that Mikhe Dorje had not yet received. And he gave him the empowerments of long life and so so forth. Now, but in detail, there's a lot that he taught if we said it in detail, but I don't need to mention everything. Now, how did Michidorji listen when he was being taught? So when they're teaching him, what he did was, first Kamatimba would come to see Michidorji, and then as soon as he arrived, when Kamatimba arrived, Michidorji would stand up from his seat. Since because he was a great teacher, sometimes he wouldn't get up. Like there's this protocol, if we say in English, that the question about who should stand up, who should sit down. There are the protocols about this. When I was in Tibet, I wouldn't get up for him. It wasn't okay to get up for some and not get up for others. So even if I was a government official, I wouldn't come. If I was a lama, I wouldn't get up. Because if you get up for one and not for the other, then someone's going to come and say you have to come. It's difficult. So I'd sit down for everyone. Then when I got to India, then I would stand up for the audiences. The main reason why I stand up is that when foreigners came, they wouldn't know the Tibetan tradition of music placements, and you'd have to show. The attendants would kind of make them, kind of press them down so they'd bend, and that didn't look good. And so they just don't know. And if you insist that they make them bend down, so at that time, so if I stood up, they could immediately say hello or good morning. It was very easy. And they could give them put the kata around their neck, and they would go away, and that was fine. It was easy, right? And so it really wasn't all that difficult. In any case, when Kamachinapa would come to Mikidorji, Mikidorji would get up, prostrate him, prepare his set, and then he would say, how were you last night? And welcome him. And then after that welcome, without much other conversation, and they would immediately begin the teaching. And the teachings would go from morning until evening. And at lunchtime, even during that time, Mikidorji would be sort of inspired by his faith for Karma Trinipa. It really affected him greatly. And he would say, I'm going to write he would write a praise for Karma Trinipa and say, I'd like to offer you this praise. And he wrote 10 different praises or supplications or long life prayers in different poetic forms for Karma Trinipa. And there's one of those that says that, reads, a prayer for the long life of Karma Trinipa, a scholar who is said to have reached the level of supreme worldly city on the supreme worldly dharma on the path of joining, whose fame fills the entire snow land. And so from this colophon, we can see that other people said that to Karma Trinipa when they said that when Karma Trinipa met Mikidorji, then they thought that Mikidorji must have thought he had some qualities of the path. So this is something that other people said later. But in the beginning of the teaching, the first teaching they taught was the Prajnapada, the ornament of clear realization, using the translation by Bende Kawapetzik. And they had the teachings on that. Now they had 3 teaching sessions per day. It's like we'd say these days, we say classes, so like 3 different, so they had 3 different sessions. And he didn't have much difficulty learning the meaning and the words, so he said, we need to have more sessions per day. And please give me 6 or 7 sessions a day. And when he said to that, Karma Trinipa was a little bit uncomfortable. He didn't quite believe. He said, if we have that many sessions in a day, then we'd only be able to say that I've taught it to you and you have heard it. You won't be able to retain the words or meaning. I don't know if that'll work out well at all. Then Mikyo Dorje would said without any hesitation, these are the points that these are the difficult points of all the different things that he'd already been taught to that point. And at one point, from one perspective, he was pleased, another, he was astonished. If that is how it is, well then, if it is like that, then merely listening will be enough. And the teachings will also go quickly, and it'll get better and better. And so they increased the number of sessions per day to 6. For example, if we had to have 7 classes a day, it would be difficult, right? Now, at that time, there also weren't any watches. And so because they didn't have watches, you'd have no idea how long a session lesson. That time you had to kind of keep track of the sun. And the sun doesn't go by minutes and minutes. And so it must have been a really long period. It's difficult for us to estimate even how long each session was. But in any case, they increased it to have 6 sessions a day. They went through the general discussions, the explication of the text and the supplements and so forth. And Mikyo Dorje was learned all easily without any difficulty. And Mikyo Dorje also taught the other dharmas of Maitrapa besides the ornament of clear realization according to his own commentaries. And some of them he taught on the explanation of the text and some on commentary on the meaning. For others, he taught the difficult points of both the text and the meaning and the general discussions and elaboration and so forth. And Mikyo Dorje studied well, and he learned them very well early. And he Mikyo Dorje became enough of a scholar and reached a level of learning that he was able to teach and debate and write about all of these topics. So if you think, well, we might wonder, how long did Mikyo Dorje study with Karma Trungpa? It was over the course of 3 years. We say over the course of 3 years. We say over the course of 3 years, but if you count in terms of the actual amount of time, it was only 14 months in total. And within that, so how long was there where the teachings continued without any interruptions? It was only one year. And so for a year, there was 1 year where they didn't miss a single day. In the old day, it wasn't like that. They didn't. In the old days, there was no talk about any days off or holidays, and so they spent. There was 1 year where they spent it every year. Now, during the time, as I mentioned before, during the teachings went from sunrise until evening. And so the teachings would last from sunrise to sunset. If there were people who needed audiences, and they'd have meetings. They called them tea meetings. Now, these are like the meetings. So the Karmapa was the boss of the, as we say these, he was the boss of the great encampment. And so he'd have to go to these meetings. And and during the meetings, they would give tea, and they'd give out the tea in the rows, and so for that they'd give it in the meetings, and so they'd call them the tea rows. And so in Serpuma Monastery in old days as well, in the old monastery before the Cultural Revolution, you'd have to go up the main staircase, and then in front of there was a meeting room, what they called the tea room, and this is during the time of the Karma Gachin as well. In any case, he had a few audiences, go to the meetings for a short period, but other than that, he didn't do any other work at all, and he'd only engage in teaching and listening. Occasionally, when teaching, Karma Trungpa would occasionally say something not related to the current point, or he'd repeat something he'd already said yesterday, or he'd digress too far from one point. And when that happened, Mikyo Dorje would ask him, "Oh, this is the point that we got to, so please continue teaching from that point." And immediately ask him to do this. He said, "Don't make too many additions side by side. Just make it exactly right." And so then Karma Trungpa would continue the place where we had left off before. So basically, they're not wasting any time. And then also during the teachings, and there are many different, sort of secondary questions, like what is the weather like today? Is people coming? He wouldn't speak about that at all. In order that he was able to listen study, he had very little food. He drank less and less tea, because if you drink a lot of tea, you have to go to the bathroom. So he had less. If you eat a lot of food, when you eat a lot of food, then after that, you immediately start getting really lethargic, right? And so he ate less food. Also, while receiving the teachings, in order that he didn't fall asleep or that he didn't have to dispel any phlegm, he wore very thin clothes. Now, the region of Kongpo, compared to other regions of Tibet, was pretty warm. And since it's pretty warm, it's possible that you can get a bit lethargic, but Mikyo Dorje had such a great interest in the difficult points and the textual meaning of the works. He really wanted to see whether he could understand them. That his awareness always seemed really clear. It never seemed like he was bored. If there was some difficult point in the text that he didn't immediately know, it's not like he didn't pretend that he knew something when he didn't, or think, well, in the future he'd learn it. Instead, he would immediately ask a question of Karma Trungpa and try to resolve his doubt. So after basically teaching for just over a year, or one full year, at that time, Karma Trungpa had said he could only go, and so and after that time had passed, Karma Trungpa asked if he asked for permission to go. Now, there are still a few teachings that Mikyo Dorje that had not been finished. And also the teacher and student were just like unable to part from each other. And so Mikyo Dorje said that he'd go and continue and escort Lama Chapchen and come to him as far as Dakchi in Kongpo. And as they continued on the trip, Karma Trungpa gave him the rest of the teachings that remained to give him. Then on the third day, the first month of the ox year, 1529, Karma Trungpa made vast offerings to Mikyo Dorje to thank him and to pray for his new life. And he also offered a new long life prayer and a list of offerings, and had it read during that gathering of many different people. In other words, it was a very impressive event. But so basically, Karma Trungpa was supposed to go, but the student and the teacher were unable to part, and that they postponed it for another day. And then on the 11th day, when Karma Trungpa was departing, then the master and disciple prostrated to each other, and they touched their heads. And when they touched their heads and they made aspirations, what Mikyo Dorje said at that time was, "Please be my spiritual friend until I reach enlightenment," is what Mikyo Dorje said to Karma Trungpa. He made this prayer. And so this time he seemed unable to part from his authentic guru. And the way he praised him and respected him. And even the attendants in Antasht were just amazed at the way he respected this, as it is related in the histories. And so that's basically a brief history of how Mikyo Dorje studied with Karma Chinlepa. When we think about the commentaries on the Prajnaparamita or the Middle Way or the Abhidharma, within those there are lots of prayers and supplications and praises of Karma Chinlepa, right? So in his commentaries and explanations of the great texts primarily came from Karma Chinlepa. And so for that reason, we are us being able to read Mikyo Dorje's commentary on the great texts, and because our being able to study them comes from the connection that Mikyo Dorje had with his guru. And so we need to remember that. And we should take the way they acted as an example and study and learn from it. Now, as I mentioned before, Mikyo Dorje studied with his four main gurus, in Gyatso Thampa Rinpoche and these are four. And you might wonder, did he study with any other gurus? So generally, what Mikyo Dorje thought was that no matter how many Buddhist scriptures you listen to or contemplate, there's no end to them. There's no end to listening or contemplation, and so for that reason, so later when Mikyo Dorje went from the region of Kham to central Tibet, if there was an authentic guru so whether they were Sakya or Gelugpa or Jigkung or Chanung or Shalupa or Nyingma, or whether the ancient tradition of Tantra or this new tradition of Samarpa, he wished to study with them and treat them with respect. But it seems that he didn't really find any such spiritual friends. In particular, at that time, he really wished to get some explanations and clarifications on the Kala Chakra. And so he investigated and asked impartial people who within the Sakya, Gelug, and Kagyu lineages would be best to teach the Kala Chakra. So at that time, they said Cha Chamyon Tashi Namgyal and Panchen Dorje, who was a student of Panchen Sharcha Chokden, were said to be the most knowledgeable about it. And so he put a lot of effort into inviting them. But even though he did, he first thought to himself, I thought maybe first we should have some distinction. And first have a little bit of discussion, give a little bit of discourse, and then see if he's able, see if Panchen Dorje was able to be a good guru, then. But Lama Dorje said that if you're definitely going to study with me, then I'm going to be with you. He said, now, if you're actually going to follow, no, I'll come if you're really going to study with me. But I'm not just going to pretend. It's as if he pretended he was not going to. And Mikyo Dorje, when he saw this, had a vision that the interdependent circumstances weren't right. And so for that reason, he was unable to invite Panchen Dorje. Later, when Mikyo Dorje went to Jigkung, first, there's the welcoming ceremony, and at that point, and they have the great arrange everyone sitting by the person who is there's someone who is leading the person who was leading the discussions and so forth. The person who was doing that was Panchen Dorje. And so at that point, Anderson. And Victor asked through Paul Tzular he asked many different questions. The questions that he asked were, the first question was, it says that in Sakya Pandija's text on the three vows, it says in the 18 different schools, there are 18 different Vinayas. Then if that is so, then there must be 18 different philosophical schools. So what are the differences between these 15 different philosophical schools? And when he asked that, then the Pancha Dorje said in a very loud voice, and he spoke with a melody and like a real showing off. There are many different schools among the exposition schools and sutra schools that we know from the Abhidharma Middle Way and from the texts on validity. Then Mikkyur Dorje asked, what are the differences between the 18 schools? Not just the sutra and exposition school, but what are the differences between the 18 schools? And then Panchen gave a very long answer, but there's no main point to it. And so then once again, Mikkyur Dorje asked him, so you're saying you have nothing to say about the 18 schools when he asked that. At that point, Panchen got his voice started quivering and he spoke a little bit more softly. So actually, I don't have anything to say. I really don't have anything to say, he accepted. Then Mikkyur Dorje said, well, the exposition school accepts that there is a self, does not accept self-awareness. The Sutra school does. The mind only asserts that self-awareness exists ultimately. And the ultimate middle way refutes self-awareness. And in the Tantras, it said that one awakens because of self-awareness. So what is the differences between these different schools' positions on self, or their descriptions of self-awareness? And so when you ask that, then Dorje will go to speak in softer and started quivering and move forward in same over time. It's like he said various discombobulated things about like things like the apprehended images and apprehending images explained in the text on validity. And at the end, Mikkyur says, are you just saying you don't know? And at that point, very, very softly, Panchen said, oh, I don't know. And so he accepted that he didn't know. And then the ceremony ended, and Panchen Dorje said to Paul Tzular Trengwa, Mikkyur Dorje was not speaking directly to him. He was speaking through Paul Tzular Trengwa. So Panchen Dorje so right after the ceremony, Panchen Dorje spoke to Paul Tzular Trengwa. He said, so generally, it's said that I know the texts, but it's said that I'm familiar with them. And in particular, when I learned that the Karmapa was coming, and from that time on, I spent all day and night studying. I read a lot of texts. And I reminded myself of I reviewed what I'd forgotten. And I looked at all of these decisions he might have asked about. And there's a lot of thoughts, and I looked them all up. But I haven't looked at that, but the things he asked about today, they didn't ask anything about the things that I'd looked at, that I'd reviewed the other day. He didn't ask. So how is it? He must be clairvoyant, he said. And so he had this kind of conversation with Paul Tzular Trengwa, as Paul Tzular Trengwa himself said. Then after that, then Mikkyur Dorje so Panchen Dorje asked questions of Mikkyur Dorje. He had many scrolls that he submitted to Mikkyur Dorje, and he said questions about whether it is possible for vows to arise without a Khenpo and so forth. So he had one question about the Vinaya. He had one page each for the Prajnaparamita, validity, Abhidharma, middle way, and Tantra in general. and in particular the Kalachakra. And so he had these 7 pieces of papers, right? And he said that all of these ultimate view is the Shentong view, so the middle way and the Abhidharma, the validity, all of these are the Shentong view. And so he offered these papers to Mikyo Dorje. Then Mikyo Dorje gave an answer. Your questions about the Vinaya that are really not actually all that difficult points. So there's a commentary on the Vinaya that I wrote. So if you read that, you'll probably know. Now you're saying that the validity and middle way are all the Shentong views, but that's illogical. You can't say that. And so that is the answer Mikyo Dorje gave. And when he gave that answer, then Panchen Dorje tried to respond with proofs to saying that the ultimate meaning of the validity and middle way is the Shentong. And Paul Tzu says that one had a particularly astonishing afternoon. Then when Mikyo Dorje said, he didn't say what he wrote as instead of answering, if you just keep on doing that, you're going to say people are going to lose faith in their Karmapa. This is like it's really kind of he didn't really actually give real answers to the question. Instead, he just wrote things such as this. But it's anyways that but Mikyo Dorje did offer Panchen Dorje the respect and position that he should have as a good scholar. Then there's another scholar that he wished to receive the Kalachakra from, and that was Jamyang Tashi Namja. Cha Jamyang Tashi Namja, when he was invited, he didn't go. He was unable to go, but he had at that time, he had really 200 rare and well-edited texts so 200 volumes that he offered to Mikyo Dorje. And he said that whatever qualities I have that I know about come from reading these. So I'm not able to come now, but please read these texts, he said. And when he said this, then so at that time, Mikyo Dorje really wished to study with many other different lamas, but that did not happen. And so for that reason, Mikyo Dorje, what he said himself was, Karma Chinapa is elderly, and I haven't found anyone else who is worthy of studying with. But still, if I can find a master who is worthy of studying with, then I'll complete to a high level my listening, contemplation, meditation of the ocean of tantras. And so this is what Mikyo Dorje said. So when we look at this, I sometimes think, when I was young, I thought I should study, but when I was in Tibet, when we would make requests to the government, I said that the heart sons of the 16th Karmapa, the Gyatso Rinpoche and Taisutto Rinpoche and Gyatso Rinpoche are in India, and so please bring them to Tibet, or either that will need to go to India. So I made this request many times, and then when I arrived in India, I did study some texts, and I tried, and I put some effort into it, both the two Rinpoches, and also Kebje Vajradhara, Trang Rinpoche, and Bokar Vajradhara. And who else? Who is it? Tengar Rinpoche, Kebje Tengar Rinpoche, Kebje Sangye Nampa Rinpoche. I've received many teachings from them, but I thought that I should study text the way they do in the great Goluk monastic colleges, or the way they do in Shedra, and but I wasn't able to do that, and I have studied quite a bit, but I was a little disappointed that I wasn't able to study everything. Then in the meantime, I did think that maybe at one point I thought maybe I should go to one of the great monastic colleges of Sera Drepung and study, but at that point I was not just an ordinary Kagyu Lama, and since I had the title of Karmapa, and if I were to go to Sera Nganden or Drepung, then I was worried about what the Kagyu followers of the Kagyu would think about that. But when Geshes would come to Jutu Monastery, I had many discussions with them. In any case, so similarly, I had the wish to study the texts, but it's hard for me to find an opportunity to study the way you do in a Shedder, to find people to teach the way you do in Shedder. Mikyo Dorje also had the same situation. He found so many, searched for so many lamas, but he's still not satisfied, and he's still looking for more text to study. And he had such a great interest in and longing to study. So basically, Mikyo Dorje had such a great interest in texts, and other people used that great who also did use the audience and so forth as an opportunity to offer many rare texts. And so they just he received innumerable texts of commentaries on the sutras and tantras. And he would spend all night reading and memorizing them without any description and making notes. And what he did is when he was reading them, he was very detailed. He would mark all the outlines in red. He'd mark the root text and the citations in yellow. If there was some subtle point about the text that wasn't clear about him, that he didn't understand, he'd write down, then he'd make little notes that I don't understand this. I need to look it up in other texts. So he'd write this out in small text. And the things that were extremely difficult, if he couldn't find them in one, if they weren't clear in any one commentary, he'd look at the different commentary, made different annotations about the different interpretations in the different commentaries, and use that as a way to make notes about how he's resolving his doubts. And he would also ask everyone who was said to know that text about the meaning of the text. And if there was some real point that he told him, he would take a note of it. And then he'd keep the notes. And then later, he would do what he could to resolve his doubts and misunderstandings. For example, when he's receiving the Treasury of Valid Logic and its commentary, or commentaries like the Higher and Lower Abhidhamma, he would memorize them. And the way he memorized them was from the first evening session until the birds began signing in the morning, he would recite the text. He did this for many times. And so he would basically be memorizing from 10 in the morning till 3 in the morning, all night long, memorizing. And not just one day or not just a month, he did this for several years. And so he continued this studying in this way for many years. Not only was it the text on the great philosophicals, but at that time, there was also a bilingual master, Karma Lodsawa Rinchen Tashi. So he was a translator. He knew Sanskrit. And so Mikyo Dorje studied from him the grammars by Kalapa and Chandragami. These are Sanskrit grammars, like what we call so he studied the grammars by Kalapa and Chandragami. He also studied about metaphors and composition, the Sanskrit writing system, and the Tibetan grammar as well. And then from Kongtun Shatyo Rinchen and Sangtun Doje Sampo, Ngaripa lecture Dorje, he studied the Indian and Tibetan texts on validity from them. And in terms of Semiti, the text on validity, and he studied many texts, including texts on collected atomics and so forth. And from Pautsulo Trengwa, who was actually his student, but from Pautsulo Trengwa, he studied the Compendium of Australia by Rangchen Dorje and the compositions that please the learned. So this is another astrology text. And so at that time, he learned how to do the calculations and so forth. So basically, no need to mention all the people who know the great texts, even the people who know the minor fields of knowledge. He really treated them. He treated them as great. He thought of them as being more rare than gold, and he would think of them as like eyes to produce produce progeny. He'd think of it. So he thought of them as eyes so you could see them. He thought of them as light that dispels the ignorance about the nature, and as like having the great result of accomplishing great enlightenment. And so when there are people who had education, who had qualities, he respected them all. He respected them all, and he treated them all with respect. And everyone saw how he did this and experienced it. Similarly, Pautsulo Trengwa said in his History of Feast of Scholars, sometimes there are some scholars who are said to be unrivaled, and when that would happen, then it said he would he would outshine them to a degree that they would be unable to answer his questions, and so they'd say, and some gave only partial answers, but they would later feel regret about it. But at that time, Gyawan Kambapa himself, he was such a great person. Even if he was a great scholar, and when you come to a great being, sometimes people get a little bit nervous about that. So I think maybe it was that. And it's because Mikyo Dorje was actually so intelligent. He had studied quite a lot, but I think he also had an innate intelligence. And so for that reason, many scholars would come to him who would just naturally outshine all these other scholars. But Mikyo Dorje himself would always say, so I have little intelligence and I have little education. I really don't know anything, he'd say. And when he said this, I don't think that he was just being modest. He thought this from the bottom of his heart. It's not, sometimes people, it's not like he was just saying that he was being modest, but in the inside there, people have the pride of thinking they know it. But it wasn't like that. He thought this from the bottom of the heart. I don't know. I have little intelligence and education. And so this is what Pautsulo Trengwa said. In any case, so now, because of time, I think that's enough about how I have studied, Mikyo Dorje studied with other authentic spiritual friends. So in summary, what I'd like to say is that Mikyo Dorje had great love for deluded beings and great reverence for the precious teachings. And in this way, Mikyo Dorje accepted great hardwits and took on the great problems, difficulties to study with his spiritual friends. And then whatever experience arose from his teaching and listening and meditation, he didn't hide any of it. He, without being miserly about the Dharma, he would teach the Dharma appropriate to the ability of those who sought it without delay. I think this is one of the most important of Mikyo Dorje's good. goods. So I think we need to use his deeds and his life as an example, and we need to follow it. As I mentioned the other day, when we receive the supplications, we shouldn't just be saying, "Oh, I go for refuge. Please look at me with compassion." Nor should they just saying, "Oh, this is an important, great Lama," or just praise him. That's not enough either. It's like it should be like just as it is said, whatever the Guru's Lama did, so will I do the same thing. We need to use the practice of the previous gurus as our example. So we need to take an example from Mikyo Dorje. And in order that we ourselves will be able to benefit sentient beings and to serve the teachings. We need to get experience in listening through the Buddhist scriptures through listening and contemplating. And then after that, we shouldn't think about it as being, I'm great, I'm educated, not try to make ourselves big. Instead, we should think about all those people, those sentient beings who are suffering, stricken by suffering, and see what we can do to help them. We need to see what we can do to do good deeds on behalf of the teaching to serve them. We have made many different shedras, and that's the reason why we've done it. It's not so that you in the future will get some sort of a degree as an acharya or a kempo, and to get a lot of diplomas. But in the actuality, if you end up without any wish to benefit sentient beings or serve the Buddhist teachings, then there's no point or no meaning to studying in a shedra. And so this is really important for us to keep this in mind. So now we'll take a break now. And then when we come back, I will continue.